controller, part number 004, is pretty straightforward in repair. You'll note again that there are 8 functions: up, down, left, right, select, start, A and B. There are 2 cartridges that are good for testing the controller. The Legend of Zelda, good one, is Breakthrough. Breakthrough, you're able to test most of the functions except select, and you're able to do that on startup. So let's put it in and find out. We insert our cartridge and turn it on. You'll notice that we can now test the select button at the beginning of Breakthrough. If the select works, you can go ahead and select 1 or 2 players, either one, it doesn't matter, and hit start. Now we've tested these 2 functions. They test fine. Now we can test up, down, fire, A and B. A makes it jump, B makes it fire, left, right makes it accelerate, and left makes it slow down. So now we've been able to test all the functions in this controller, and they test out fine. The first thing to check for, if and when a controller doesn't work, is the cord. Look for physical damage. I look at the controller, turn it over, roll it around, look for any kind of physical damage that may have occurred to it, such as being dropped. I've seen some that have been chewed on by animals. I've seen others that have been literally run over by cars that have been broken in half. So check the controller for any damage. The next thing you want to do is check the cord for any punctures or tears in the cord, which is the most common problem. So what I usually do, turn the game off, pull the cord out, and I simply run my fingers along the outside of the cord, and if there's any kind of bump or cut, you'll be able to feel it. So I run my finger all the way along the cord and to see if I can feel any cut. If there is a cut, the cord is usually bad. Now there's 2 things you can do on that. You'll notice that this controller cord is actually shorter than the normal one. When I got this controller in, it had been bit or cut approximately 6 inches from the top of the cable. I was able to cut it off and shorten it, and thereby retaining the usage of the controller. However, it's just a little shorter cord now, which is usually not a problem for most people. If the problem occurs, or the bite occurs down in this end, it's usually a little more difficult to repair, and I will show you how to repair one of those. The first thing you want to do is clear out an area where you can work, and if the controller is bad and you find that the cord is in tip-top shape, again, like I said, the first thing you want to do is clear out an area. So I will remove the control deck from the surface of our workbench, and usually what I like to do is lay some kind of soft cloth down so that this doesn't get scratched. Now let me back up here and make one note. Please be aware of static electricity. I've chosen a workbench that is made out of wood, and I'm working on a cement floor where there's very little chance of static buildup. If you are in an area that is susceptible to static electricity, please get a static bracelet and ground yourself before working on any of these. Some of the chips that you'll be working on in the Nintendo are CMOS chips and are very sensitive to static. So be very careful with that and be aware of it. So the first thing I like to do is I usually like to cover the bench with something soft that won't scratch the controller should there be any kind of particles on there. The next thing you'll need is the small tipped Phillips screwdriver, and I want you to take out all 6 screws. Loosen all 6 screws. Don't pull them out yet. Loosen the 6 screws of the controller. move that out. Now notice the cord comes in, it wraps around these two. I'm going to pause the camera here and zoom in so you can see a little better a close-up of this. Okay, you will note that the cord comes in, it wraps around these two strain relief pins, and these are corrugated, have edges on them to grip it so that this cord can't slide out, and it allows you to give a little pull or a little tension on this cord without pulling it out. So when you replace it, make sure that it wraps around and follows the diagram into the center here, through the center, and in where it's attached. Now notice the controller has one controlling chip in it, and that is a CD4021, which is a CMOS chip. And I want you to understand the purpose of this chip. What this chip does is a serial parallel chip, and when the controller dies, 99% of the time it's that chip. So all you have to do is remove the chip, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, and replace it with a new chip, and usually the controller will work. But you need to ohm out the cord first of all to make sure that the cord is okay. So the next thing that you do is remove the cord by pulling it off of there, lay it back down, and pull the circuit board off. Now there are, inside the controller, there are 3 silicon membranes that reside in there that you can actually pull these out, set them aside. Sometimes dirt or food will get underneath them, so as I take them out I make sure they're clean. I just kind of rub them off. The best thing to do would be to get a Q-tip and rub them off with a Q-tip. So we pull those off, make sure that they're clean. I usually wipe them on the towel. Okay, and now there are some buttons inside. Now notice on the buttons that there are some latches here, some holes where the levers from the buttons fit in. There is a correct direction that the button will fit in, and if you try to reverse the button, it'll still fit in. But some controllers I've seen where one side of this is larger than the other, so you can't get it turned around. I think in this one it's interchangeable. But this also comes out, and it might be a good idea to pull that out and to clean that while you're in there, and to tip the button over. Now all of this can be washed by just immersing it in warm soapy water, and you'll be able to clean it off. Before you put it together, again, make sure that it's clean and dry. Now what I have here, so that you can see, is I have a clear bowl of warm water that I put just a little dishwashing soap in. I'll use that to clean these parts with. So what I usually do is immerse the parts in the warm water, and even the top, if it's unusually dirty, put that in there, and remove the screws from the bottom. Sometimes they're a little tricky to get them out. You have to kind of push hard. 6 screws. 2, 4, 6. Put that in there too, and let them start to soak. Okay. Now if we flip the circuit board over, you'll notice that there are some contacts on the circuit board that are where you make contact. As you'll notice that this is the exact layout of the front panel. We have up, down, left, right, select, start, A, and B. Now it's very easy for food to get down into these, so what I do is I just take a cotton swab and clean the top of these. Usually you'll see large chunks of food or dust, dirt, pet hair, something like that down inside. Okay. Now, check for any kind of break. Sometimes I get these in where they're cracked. Now, one thing that you want to do is make sure when you get the controller apart, make sure that all the wires are contacted properly. The way that you do that, unfortunately, you have to have a part for that. If you take apart a Nintendo, which I will show you later, you will have where the controller plugs into the main control deck. There's a little jack and wire assembly that goes on the end of this, and I've already got one here that I'm going to show you, but you may want to use one to troubleshoot controllers. Now I will show you how to get one of these, to take one of these out a little later on, but for the sake of discussion right now, let me just show you how to work this. You insert that into the jack, and now the color here 99% of the time is the same color here. And I'm not sure what the camera angle is here. Using a voltmeter, you can check to see that the cord is correct. So I'm going to put this on. I have a voltmeter that has continuity check. That means that whenever there's a dead short between the two leads, this will give an audible beep. It's a nice feature to have on any meter. So you don't have to look up. So what you do is you take your meter and you touch it to the yellow, and the yellow on this end, and you should get an audible beep. Work your way down, making sure that you get a beep on each one of the wires. And lastly, we have white. White you usually have to flip over both sides to get to. Okay, so now we've checked out, in this particular case, we've checked out the cable. We know that the cable is okay. If the cable were not okay, it's usually a result of, as I said earlier, a bite or a break or a tear in the cable. If you have two choices, you can replace the cable with another cable, usually off of a junk controller, or you can find a supplier of the 5-strand cable and replace the cable with the connector on either end, connector and controller on the end, or you have the choice of just shortening it and resoldering this end, which is usually the choice that I make. What I do is let's say that the cut were to occur here, right here, I would simply cut the wire before that, strip it back a couple of inches, as you see here, desolder this end right here, and pull it out and shorten the cable. And I'll do that for you in just a moment and show you how to do that. The other thing that you can do, if the cable all ohms out correctly and you get continuity through the cable, then chances are that it's the 4021 chip. It's a shift register, a serial parallel shift register. And usually that's what goes wrong. If the cable checks out properly, as we've just shown you, then the next thing to check is the chip. And the chips are so inexpensive. This one happens to be a Motorola chip, an MC14021. And you can get that from most supply houses. Pull these out now that they're rinsed off, and set them down and let them start to dry out for reassembly in just a moment. Okay. Now I'm going to take the water and put it back in the sink and get rid of it. Now if you've determined that the chip needs to be replaced or the cord needs to be shortened, what you'll need next is you'll need a soldering iron. And I like to have a clean sponge to keep the tip of it clean. You'll need a method of desoldering, either a solder vac, solder sucker, or solder wick, and then you'll need some solder to replace that, and you'll need the spare chip. So I'm going to give you a moment to go round those up. I'm going to go ahead and plug my soldering iron in so that it starts warming up. Okay, I'll let that warm up. I have a special soldering station that I place here so that the soldering iron doesn't fall down. So I'm going to pause the video and put in the soldering station and show you how to replace one of those chips and also shorten the wire. Okay, what I like to do is use a board, a special board here, that if I burn it, if I scratch it or something, it won't hurt. I can throw this away, and that way I don't mar my workbench. And then also I have this solder holder attached. Sometimes the cord gets caught on something as I draw my arm back, and this way it doesn't get pulled away. I also have a clean tip here. So I've now folded up my parts. I'm going to set the parts gently over here to the side and let them start drying. I'm going to take my 6 screws. And put them over here so that they don't get lost. And I'm going to hang this up and let it start to dry. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to a hot soldering iron and a clean tip, you'll need some solder. So I usually take some solder and I just roll off a chunk of it so I don't have to mess with that large spool. I get my solder lead out to where I can solder. I have some solder wick that I've purchased from a supply house. I like to keep it clean so that I have a clean tip off. Wire strippers and wire cutters is what you'll need. Now, on the CD4021, I've ordered quite a lot of them. I have quite a lot in supply. You may want to do the same. So, you'll also need a spare one of those if you're going to replace that. Okay? Now, I'm going to take the camera and zoom in closer so you can actually see what's going on. So I'm going to pause it here. Okay, kind of close quarters here, but that's fine. Lay the circuit board down. I'm going to show you first of all how to replace the cord, shorten and replace the cord. Make sure that your soldering iron is hot enough to melt the solder and clean enough to do so. Way to do that is to test it by applying some solder to the tip. Make sure that it melts the solder. Okay? What I normally do is I apply a little bit of solder here, and you can see that as you apply it, it real cleanly removes the solder, pulls the solder right off. Now when you get a regular Nintendo controller in, they won't have the wires going straight into here. There'll be a little crimp on the end of that you'll have to deal with, but that shouldn't be any problem. So then these will just pull right out as you heat each one. Some of them will pull out without heating, others need to be heated to pull out. So now I've got them pulled out. Okay? Now what we want to do is find the affected area. Let's say that the affected area, for argument's sake, would be right here where the bend occurs and it's been moved back and forth and it's broken there. You take your wire snips and snip just below the affected area and take this bad part and throw it away. You then take your wire strippers and you want to strip back about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of clean wires. There's a small cloth reinforcement line in there that you don't need, so you clip that off, throw that part away, and that leaves the 5 leads that you will need in order to effect repair. Now these wires are not ordinary wires. What they are is they're a wire with a cloth wrapped around fabric to give it extra strength and flexibility so it doesn't break. what I usually do is I strip back just a very small tip, probably 1/32 to a 1/16 of an inch. If you get this too small, it'll stretch the wire way out. So strip back just a little, about a 1/16. So now you've got them there. And what I like to do is form my little solder loop so that I can do direct soldering without having to worry about holding it. So I just tin. What you want to do is you want to tin the tops of each one of these wires. So make sure that it's straight, and then run a little solder along the top of it. So these are tinned now. So you have all 5 of them, and they're tinned. Get your circuit board, and it doesn't matter which one you start with. You can insert the red first of all, flip it over, and as you hold it with your finger, again I take my solder, form a little loop like that, and bend it down so that it'll touch the circuit board, and you don't need 3 hands that way. And solder enough that you get a good connection. You don't have to necessarily cover the hole, but enough so that you get a good connection. And go back, now that I've got the red attached, we want to attach the yellow. I don't know if you can see that or not. So we'll move out of the way here. The yellow. That's the yellow, where it says yellow, obviously. Want brown next. Again, you don't have to do it in this order. Brown is now attached, and we have white and orange. Got both of them there. Do both at the same time. Got white and orange detached now. Okay. So you see that those are complete, and they've been attached in the proper order, and you've now hopefully solved the wire problem. Again, a proper way would be to make sure that you've fixed the problem is to take your voltmeter and ohm out the colors back to the color corresponding here. Okay. So I'm going to detach the little connector. Now I'm going to show you how to replace the 4021. Most of you already know how. So you can, the way that I've made this is you can fast forward through it. Get your desoldering wick, your solder wick, clip off some clean ends. Now this is such that you can almost do 2 leads at the same time if your soldering iron is just proper. And this soldering iron is a 45 watt soldering iron. It's a Weller 45 watt. So I like to put it right between 2 and slide it up, and it cleans 2 out at the same time. Then move down to a clean piece of braid and move those up. The next one, move up. So you can actually do 2 at a time if you do it right. Don't hold it there too long. Actually, on a bad chip that you're pulling out, it really doesn't matter. Spin it around and repeat the process for the other side. Apply it, slide it in, and it'll remove the solder. Slide it in, slide it in, slide it in. Now removed the solder from all of these leads. If you flip the chip over and you have a small screwdriver, I'm reaching for one here, sorry. You can insert the small screwdriver here and gently rock the chip up, and it'll just slide right out. Most circuit boards have written on it IC 4021, and note the notch at the end here. The notch corresponds on the chip to the bubble. You want pin 1 here. If you get it flipped around like that, it won't work. Note the notch and note where the new chip goes. Now the new chip's feet will be a little spread, so what you'll need to do is kind of squeeze it so it fits in. Now we've got it to fit in there. And now we're going to solder it back and put the new chip in. Now again with solder, this is a new chip. You don't want to get it really hot. Just put enough solder on there and do it quickly enough that you've made a good solder joint. I don't like that smoke blowing up in my face, so I blow it away. Not a good idea to breathe it anyway. Cleaning the tip often to keep it clean. The way you clean it is just put it in there and roll it. I don't know if you can see that or not, but again, work your way down, solder each chip one at a time. So now we've replaced the chip. So we've checked the wire's alright, there's no breaks, no cuts, cleaned off the top of it. Our circuit board is ready to be replaced into the housing. A little bit of water still left in it, so I'm going to pause and dry these off with a towel, and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, now what I've done is I've laid my towel back down here, give me the clean surface that I need, and I'm bringing the parts back in. Now you'll notice that there's still a few little drops of water here. Won't hurt anything as long as you wait a few minutes before you plug it in and turn it on. As long as there's no power here, you won't have a problem with the water. The way that it goes back, that's notched, and doesn't matter how that goes. You can get it in any direction. Then note that the black dots go towards you. You don't want them facing down like that, or they won't make contact. That's actually metal that will actually bridge the gap on here when you push down on those. So that one's been replaced. This one doesn't have any buttons, it's just one unit, and note the notch hole here that goes over, so that goes like that. Then replace the two red buttons, A and B buttons, and the silicon membrane that goes over it, and now you've got all three of them back in place the proper way. Put the circuit board the direction it needs to go. There's some notches here that these retaining pins will hold it. Then feed your cable down through here, feed it back around. What it needs to do is go around, I don't know if you can see that, around those, through there, and out the opening. So now we've got a strain relieved circuit board. A little too much strain on here, so I'm going to pull it back a little, and there we go. And we've got it like that. So now with the cord coming out, we're prepared to put the back on. Now as you apply the back, make sure the cord is directed properly. Everything's in place, cord's direct properly. Place it on its face and replace the screws